MIT study that said people use ChatGPT to get dumber. Like, we don't think an AI is going to replace a human. But you got to start using AI. The one thing that's powerful about human ingenuity, which is also why I think AI won't replace us, there is a kind of sheer will that entrepreneurs and builders and just human ingenuity has. The kind of ingenuity that had to survive crises and wars and all these problems are the same ingenuity that we have to basically build companies and build businesses and see world opportunities that others don't.
2024 was kind of like solopreneurs. These are pre-seed, tier 1 backed startup. They're asking the question, should we use AI? And then 2025 was, how should we use AI? What we're seeing this year across all those segments in industry is, how do we operationalize AI across every segment of our business?
We're all talking about one person sort of companies, because an AI agent can do so much work for you, tokenize or die. If you don't have a token strategy, if you're not tokenized, you will lose against the company that is tokenizing. There are all these technological shifts that happen that basically you have to be ready for to address these new markets.
You should be testing multiple things concurrently. There's no reason why you can't do that. If you're leveraging these agentic coding tools like Cursor or Kiro or Claude Code, you can have multiple windows opening, running simultaneously, running different agent workflows, and getting to a point where you don't even just have a POC. You actually have a production-ready tool deployed in the cloud, built to scale for nothing. So you can get credit to different cloud providers like AWS Activate, so there's no excuse not to be able to go to market quickly.
The ability to become an expert in everything is so much more available than ever before.
And you can also fail fast.
We wanted to take them away from the ChatGPT search experience. That experience itself limits you. So if you go into a website experiencing like search, you immediately start thinking, what should I ask it? That's not the way that you're supposed to frame it. Oh, it can actually respond in this manner. And then when you begin from that level, the imagination opens up.
The difference between somebody that succeeds as a founder or a group of founders or somebody that doesn't are the ones that are committed to that learning experience. Then dive in deep and you understand how to use these tools, how not to use these tools, what their limits are, what these limits are, and then the light bulb moment happens.
When capital meets infrastructure, we have Yat Siu from Animoca Brands and Ian Holtz from AWS. This is probably one of the most important conversations you will be watching if you're a builder or an investor that is interested in tech. Hello, guys.
Hi.
Thank you for having us.
How are you feeling?
There's a lot of energy.
Yeah. It's a lot of energy. I always, if the markets are down, which they are a little bit in crypto, shall we say, I tell everyone, just come to a crypto conference and re-energize. And, I would say, true to form, consensus has been that.
See, that's the most interesting part, because every time when I go to a conference, we talk to builders and everyone's so excited.
That's right.
But the sentiment among retail investors, it feels a little different.
Yeah, but I think we need to distinguish between builders and investors as well, and particularly retail investors who are really operating a little bit on fear because they have uncertainty, they don't understand what's going on. And it's not just about what's happening in crypto, it's all macro, right? Yeah. What's happening with Iran, what's happening with Warsh, is it good for the economy or not? All these things that happen all at the same time, we just don't know, right? And that uncertainty is unsettling for everything. It's not just crypto, right? But the builders, they see a future, right?
Yeah.
If you're a builder, it doesn't matter if it's AI or crypto or whatever, they're kind of all sort of intersecting anyway. You're not here for today, you're here for tomorrow.
Yeah.
And if you're excited about tomorrow, this is great. So come to conferences like this to see tomorrow, right?
And you guys are building towards tomorrow. So
Correct.
Basically you decide what tomorrow looks like. That's my interpretation, right?
That's a bit bold.
Yeah. Well, I would just say, at AWS, we provide the infrastructure for the builders.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are innovating. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So from our perspective, we're democratizing access to technology. The builders of today that are innovating for tomorrow, whether those are students or tier 1 invested VC startups from pre-seed to Series B, they have access to the very same tools.
Yes.
And so, what I also noticed, conferences like this, outside of the sentiment that we see on the media, is, the convergence is real, right? The convergence that we're seeing, with whether it's robotics or, AI coding accelerating workloads, is happening here. And so, outside of trading markets, that's energy that we're seeing. So,
and I think just to add to that, when you build the tools for that, and it makes it easier for innovators to come in, they can ideate and focus on creativity rather than just the tech. I mean, I was there for the early days of the internet, right? And I remember to set up a web server, I had to buy my own box. I had to literally build it. And of course, today, I can do everything virtually. I just do it on a dashboard, and voila, I have a server. Right. And the abstraction layer goes even higher and higher between applications, between services. Mm-hmm. And this is the thing about blockchain. Blockchain is another one of those layers that abstracts essentially the security layer of anything that has value, essentially, whether it's financial, whether it's asset holding. one of the big topics last year was prediction markets like Polymarket. I don't think a lot of people know that Polymarket was built on blockchain. I don't think a lot of people care. However, Polymarket would not have been able to be built in the speed and the manner in which it has if it wasn't for blockchain. Because think about what it would take to build an infrastructure that can handle your money, that can put a bet on the millions of dollars of size, that can do all that type of stuff. You'd have to sort of hire someone that basically can build like a quasi mini bank, which would cost not millions, but probably hundreds of millions of dollars infrastructure. That infrastructure is not just available for Polymarket, it's available from the 16 to 14-year-old to the 70 or 80-year-old, and they can all innovate on top of it, add vibe coding to it, and my mom can start coding financial implications if she wanted to, because the hard part is taken care of, right? And so I think we're entering a world that's going to be much more creative, which is why we're also seeing a lot more startups and entrepreneurs. That's actually accelerating. It's not declining. I remember being a startup, an entrepreneur in the 90s, it's a long time ago, meant you were unemployed. That's really what it was. Nobody would hire you, so you start your own company, right? And now it's kind of expected almost, right? If you go to your parents and you say, especially Chinese parents, or maybe Asian parents generally, and you say, hey, I'm going to do my own startup.
Yeah.
Try that 20 years ago, right? And now it's like, okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. That's cool, right? So yeah, it's changed a lot.
Do you think capital decides where technology goes, or is it the other way around?
I don't think those are opposing. Mm-hmm. I think they compound each other. So if you start thinking about investment without infrastructure, that's speculation. You start talking about infrastructure without investments, that's unused compute. So they're not opposing forces, they're compounding forces in my view.
Yeah. And I think also just to add on that, I mean, the one thing that's powerful about human ingenuity, which is also why I think AI won't replace us, right? Even when we're talking about AGI and all that kind of stuff, which is a different topic altogether, is that there is a kind of sheer will that entrepreneurs and builders and just human ingenuity has. Mm-hmm. The kind of ingenuity that had to survive crises and wars and all these problems are the same ingenuity that we have to basically build companies and build businesses and see world opportunities that others don't, right? Mm-hmm. And then they create this kind of impact. And now because the cost of that deployment has gone lower and lower and lower, I mean, we're all talking about one person sort of companies because an AI agent can do so much work for you and it's reduced over time. I mean, you had to hire so many more people just to run a website. And now you basically just do it yourself, for instance, as an example. That type of stuff makes it just possible to just grow, and the cost isn't that high anymore, right?
Okay.
So I think when we look at, for instance, our investment side, because we have a lot of them, right? The sort of seed investing startup phase was often, I have an idea, and this is what I need to get my idea going. Okay, fine. Here's the equity. Here's what I do it. But he didn't have a product. Now seed is, here's my product. It's built. It doesn't really quite have maybe product market fit, but maybe you can help me with this. It's completely different. We're basically evolved to really the stage in investing of a seed company is much more like a Series A-ish type company or pre-Series A, say even 10 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. So the cost is low and the risk is much lower as well.
People are talking about AI agents, but I want to know how far away from people actually building companies with AI agent. How far are we?
What we're seeing from builders is as fast as it's moved, there's still a gap, right? So there's a big gap between an agent buying an airplane ticket versus an agent.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right,
for
and
sure.
so we're clearly in category 1. Mm-hmm. There's a ways to go to get to category 2. We're seeing glimpses of it, but we're not quite there yet.
Is it easier for, let's say, if I'm a solopreneur, it's easier for me to try out AI agents and all these different tools.
Yeah.
But when we talk about big companies, they're very careful when it comes to.
Well, I think there's a different perspective as well. When we come about big companies,
yeah,
there's a lot of private data that they have to protect. Mm-hmm. So it's about policy. I mean, I don't think many corporations will be happy to install OpenClaw right into their local servers. I mean, in their local infrastructure, that would be a problem because they're going to do and see stuff that is like, what is all this about?
Yeah.
However, and if you're a solo entrepreneur or a small office, the risks are much lower and you can experiment around that. But I think what you saw with OpenClaw, it kind of opened up the possibility to say, wait, hold on, it can kind of do this stuff. And to your point, it's, again, because we don't think an AI is going to replace a human, but the instrumentation is going to be happening through an AI agent who can do all this stuff for you as well, right? So you don't have to do all the minutia, set up the GitHub, set up the infrastructure, even write down the sort of draft email, that kind of stuff. It can do 90% of that or 95% of that,
right.
And then you go in at the final stages and edit and review. So you have to understand it, right? It's going to write well for you, but you still have to know how to write, right? If you don't know how to write, then whether it's code or whether it's English or whether it's Chinese, if you don't know how to do that, it's not going to help you, right? So you still need the foundations. But when you have that, it can be a really, really powerful agent. The other thing, of course, is what I find really powerful with what we have with Animoca Minds, which is our own sort of AI agent, is it's a way in which an agent can neutrally organize essentially collaborative workspaces in really a sort of apolitical way.
Explain that.
Well, so if an AI agent basically gives you an output or makes a suggestion or even says it's a dumb idea, you won't be offended quite the same way. Right?
Okay.
But it's very different if a coworker you work together with basically says, that is stupid. I'm not saying that an AI agent should say that, but the criticism is very different. And so they're actually great arbiters, not because they're the ones that have the final judgment, but you will look at it not in the same way, right? And the other thing is that because AI agents like this have persistent memory, they can basically recollect stuff for you on instruction that you might forget. Because, we have one side, incredible creativity and that kind of consciousness that AI doesn't have, but that same creativity, because we have feelings and we have emotions, can impact us in ways that an AI will not, right? And so what we're seeing right now is that an AI agent is going to be in every part of your workspace to assist and support you, not to replace you, and then basically to accelerate your work effort. And also in family planning, in sort of life schedules, calendar, booking tickets, right? I mean, that's going to do a lot, right? As you said. I think, we're in Hong Kong. We get spoiled in Hong Kong a little bit because we have a lot of help. Most of the world does not, right? So most of the world could take good use of an AI agent like that.
Yeah, I would just add to, you asked about solopreneurs, Yat touched on data sovereignty and the skepticism around trust related to OpenClaw and enterprise. I will tell you from an infrastructure perspective, if you look back 2 years in 2024 versus 2025 versus this year, we're definitely seeing shifts happening. So 2024 was kind of like, this is solopreneurs. These are pre-seed tier 1 backed startups. These are enterprises across the spectrum, across the segment, across geos. They're asking the question, should we use AI, right? In 2024, right?
Yeah.
And then 2025 was not should we use AI, how should we use AI? Right. And so what we're seeing this year across all those segments and industry is how do we operationalize AI across every segment of our business? And so, these things are happening. There's still a gap, like I said, between booking the airplane tickets and running your business, but that reality is fast approaching.
You've seen a lot of builders. What are some, things and trends that you've seen that excites you the most?
I cover agentic coding tools.
Okay.
Yeah, so at AWS we have a flagship tool called Kiro, but we also support Anthropic Claude Code natively within Bedrock. I work with a lot of startups that are supporting a variety of other agentic coding tools. So what I've seen, as a developer in the industry for a very long time, is we're seeing a 10x output from developers. And so I'm working with senior level developers that had started tinkering with these tools a few years ago, wasn't really working, was creating a lot of slop. The ones that are fully embracing it and they're actually not writing any code. So you start talking about 2-week sprints being conducted in a day. There's terminology around that, around conversion between sprints to bolts. And so what took teams of people to develop product in 3 or 6 months is now being done in weeks. And that's again across segments, geos, and enterprises to startups. So that's what I'm seeing is really an acceleration by leveraging these agentic coding tools.
I mean, we're particularly excited about how the entire framing of the web is basically changing into one where maybe this potentially could be one of the biggest challenges for at least the incumbent platforms. And the reason why is that because the biggest business model for them has been advertising.
Okay.
And when you think about advertising, basically in an agentic world, like we're moving into sort of, Web3 was a foundation, that layer where you could have ownership through blockchain. And basically, I don't know if you want to call it Web4, but essentially the agentic web effectively allows you to pull all this information. We're still used to going somewhere to pull information, and we're not used to getting this information pushed to us because there's a lot of slop. As in, even an AI recommendation engine typically will send you stuff that you don't want, so you don't really care about it. You want to go to the destination. And if you look at ChatGPT as the sort of OG of this sort of LLM moment, this sort of ChatGPT moment, as they say, the interface was search. It wasn't a special innovation. It wasn't like an agent talking to you. It was basically just a better search. And many companies are already saying, wait, hold on a second. I'm not actually I'm getting less clicks on my website. Because now if I'm going to Google, Gemini is giving you everything you need to know. I don't have to hop into that next stage, right? So there's going to be this whole movement around, okay, how do I get my fair share? YouTube had to have content ID with the creators. There's going to be a version around that. There's going to be a whole movement around, it's already happening with MCP servers, right? So we're moving from HTTP to MCP, right? The user is getting everything delivered to it through the agent, right? Whether it's the messenger, whether it's web application that you're using. And the entire framing of the web is going to change from the way that we're experiencing it, more efficiently, more faster. But also as a result of that, this is why we think the token economy has become so powerful, because how are all of those sort of MCP servers are going to sort of exchange value with each other? It's going to be through a token infrastructure, which is basically one that is something that you can verifiably prove, whether it's a stablecoin or another token. That's kind of beside the point. It's like, oh, I know this is real, right? And then, by the way, this is also why digital identity becomes so critically important, which is why we're building Rails around that too, because I need to know whether this agent is verified, right? We're going to have more agents transacting than humans. And I don't mean just money. I mean like taking data, doing that kind of stuff, right? How do I know that he's authorized to do so? You need an identity layer that, that has a reputation stack that could be entirely digital, that could be just an agent, right? And we're really excited about that because through that infrastructure, maybe we can now establish the framing that we were hoping for with Web3, better sharing of that value. Because right now it's not transparent, right? Google controls essentially much of that supply, right? Effectively directing advertising, you have to pay them all the money. What happens if I now can free through a token economy? Now you have also third-party people who can actually also bet into that, so to speak. Say, hey, you know what? I think this website might be popular with the data they're creating. I can actually be an investor in the asset class of that data, right? Data is actually, and has always been a commodity, but it wasn't possible to do so until tokenization. RWAs is an interesting topic because everyone says, oh, real world assets, is it real estate, is it stocks? Yeah, but for our children, when we tokenized video game items as NFTs, that was real world to them, right? It's data is basically, I would say, an RWA. It's just never been framed in this way because when we talk about sort of intellectual property rights and taking royalties and turning that into a tokenized yield product, we call that an RWA. But what is IP? It's entirely virtual, right? So really, I think RWA is just a fancy way to try to connect the physical to the digital world, but to the human mind, it's all real anyway.
I think in one of your interviews, you talk about in the future, every company will launch their token. Is that correct?
What I said was tokenize or die.
Right.
So what I meant by that was that if you don't have a token strategy, if you're not tokenized, you will lose against the company that is tokenizing, right?
Explain that.
Well, so think about the early days of the internet when we had this thing called digital literacy. You lost to the company that went online. If you're a media company, if you're a newspaper and your newspaper competitor went online, you lost to that guy, right? If you were selling books and there was an online bookseller, you lost to the guy who was an online bookseller, clearly, right? Predecessor here, right? So the point being that there are all these technological shifts that happen that basically you have to be ready for to address these new markets. If you were not on the App Store and your competitor who was in the App Store, he would win against you. If you were on social media and your competitor was not, you will win against, it's a classic thing.
Yeah.
So for tokenization, it's the same. But for tokenization, it's not only because agents can read your asset, that's a big one, or maybe that's a youth asset class that people like. It's also the fact that you have now new financial instrumentations available to you that make it possible to leverage your assets, right? Which, if you can leverage your assets that you couldn't lever before, and your competitor can't do that, game over for your competitor, right? So that's what I mean by tokenize or die. Now, if you happen to be fortunate enough to be in an industry where tokenization doesn't matter because nobody tokenizes, it's all the same. But my point is that if you can figure out the token strategy, which we think you will be able to, just like how you'll figure out your internet strategy back in the day, right? Then you will win. And every company has to think about, how do I tokenize? because if you don't tokenize, you'll be left out of this agentic web.
If someone is watching this episode and they really want to start their own thing, they're very inspired by what you guys are saying. What are some really cool ideas, you can come up with, or any suggestions to whoever that's watching?
It's a great question. I talked to a lot of founders, and if we're talking about Web3 in general, we're definitely seeing it not being limited to crypto or gaming. It's impacting everything from supply chain management to database analytics through zero knowledge proof and mining data that's not accessible before. So really, the sky's the limit. What the advice that I do give to founders is pick the problem, pick something that you're passionate about, make sure that the economics work, and find product market fit. Right. So. I've even failed as a founder where I built something that I thought was incredibly compelling. It was also innovative. It worked, but it didn't have that product market fit, right? And the economics didn't work mostly.
Okay.
So, we were able. It was one of my early stage startups where we were still able to onboard hundreds of thousands of users, but the economics didn't make sense. So, just because you can create a product doesn't mean you should create a product. So, I won't try to guide them into a particular segment or an idea, because I think the sky's the limit with the tools that they have today, with democratizing access to technology, the agentic workflows that are coming. It's really, a one-person show with almost nothing, can build a working product and find that product market fit. And I myself, like all of the other passionate builders around the world, you should be testing multiple things concurrently. There's no reason why you can't do that. If you're leveraging these agentic coding tools like Cursor or Kiro or Claude Code, you can have multiple windows opening, running simultaneously, running different agent workflows, and getting to a point where you don't even just have a POC. You actually have a production-ready tool deployed in the cloud, built to scale for nothing. Right? So you can get credits through different cloud providers like AWS Activate. So there's no excuse not to be able to go to market quickly.
You guys are giving out credits, right?
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Yeah. So we offer out of the box up to 100K in credits. There's exceptions up to 200K and beyond for Gen AI use cases. So you can find credits for AWS at startups.aws. It's our flagship program for founders, and it's not just about credits. The credit part's important because we want to eliminate barriers to infrastructure. But it's also providing go-to-market support. It's also providing technical support. So, again, our goal is to provide the tools and provide democratization and to lift those barriers around infrastructure so founders can get to building and scaling.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would say to founders, there's so much, right? Rather than talk about a specific category, is you just have to be excited about learning all the latest new technologies and just get into it. If you don't have a learning mind frame, it doesn't matter what it is, right?
Yeah.
So it sounds very trope. Oh, you got to be curious and blah blah blah, but it is true, right?
Yeah.
Because you might have a great idea and you want to solve a problem. But if you lack the curiosity to go dive deep into technology, well, by the way, you don't have to be a technologist to understand it, but you just have to dive deep into it and kind of become, and that's the thing, the ability to become an expert in everything is so much more available than ever before, right?
And you can also fail fast.
And you can fail fast, exactly. And you can just dive into this, and then when you use the tools and you're in that ecosystem, then you go, oh, that's possible, and this is possible, and that's the idea, right? I think the problem, a lot of it is, I say it's kind of like the international China thing, which is like, oh, China has 1 billion users back in the day, right? And they're like, if I sell shoes there, it's going to do really well, right?
You just need 10%.
Yeah, I just need even 1%. Yeah, my goodness, there's 1 billion Chinese.
Yeah.
So let's do that. Let's just roll it out. I just go and do it. And then it turns out it's much harder because guess what? They had to go to China, maybe have to speak the language, we have to learn stuff.
Get a bank account.
Get a bank account. Right. Go and meet all the vendors. And suddenly, through that process of that whole step, after he's done that for a year or two or 6 months or whatever, then they become an expert. And then they identify, oh, this is how I do this. And this is how I sort of navigate this. Now, because of AI and because of blockchain and Web3, you can do this all in your own bedroom.
Right.
You don't have to travel anywhere, but you do have to go in. So, we meet founders who say they use AI, and we see this in the business plan. And then it's very easy when you talk to them a little bit, actually, how much AI are they really using, right? Are you using AI to get ChatGPT to basically write your business plan, or use Notebook LLM from Google, which is a fascinating product, by the way?
Yeah.
Or are you actually going deeper with it? How are you optimizing those workflows?
Does it matter?
It matters greatly.
Okay.
Because, to me, using ChatGPT is what everyone else can do.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm great at Google search. Good for you. But it's not something that gives you a particular competitive advantage.
Right.
Because everyone else can do that. But how you're optimizing your workflows gives you the insight, you get it, or this is what you're doing. And it's even away from the jargon. Like, it doesn't matter which LLM you're using per se, right? It's more about what are you trying to optimize. The LLM will come to it when you know what you're trying to optimize for, right? And that's why, you got to use some kind of framework, right? You got to start using AI because you could be using AI just for a business solution. Nobody said that you had to program everything from scratch. If you know what it could do, then you can imagine it. Then you'll go into the rabbit hole of saying, how do I solve that, right? And again, with Web3 as well, we've had so many, back in the early days, so many companies said, I want to tokenize. Have you ever bought a token? No. Okay. Do you have a wallet? No, right? It's impossible to have a real conversation then because they see the prospect, but they don't understand it. So you have to do the work.
Let's say you're a person that is really interested in this new AI wave and they want to build a business around it. But, the analogy I would use is if you can't build a phone, maybe you can build a phone case. You can start a company that sells phone case. Or if you can't even do that, can you open a shop that helps people put on the protector? Like, there are so many different levels when it comes to the industry.
So I know that analogy. It's a niche, right? So instead of creating a segment, you're creating a supplier to a particular niche. But with AI, I think it really could be anything. It's kind of a non-answer, but it could be database and analytics. It could be scalability. It could be helping identify customer segments. It could be scale. Really the sky's the limit. I don't think there's one single answer. Maybe you have a different idea. I think you're going to lean on tokenization, obviously. So I don't think there's. The movement that we're seeing in the AI impact, I don't think there's a single industry that outshines the others that can be impacted or capitalized on.
Yeah. So on the token infrastructure, the way we think about token infrastructure, it lays the foundation for agentic AIs.
Right.
Right. So take that aside. There's a model around that. I think most people are going to be approaching it from the agent or AI side, where the token just becomes infrastructure to support them on the transaction, on the system, and whatever, to make it optimized in that manner, right? But on the AI side, let's say you're not technical at all, you can basically just start using one of those agent frameworks, right? And they're getting so much easier. So, we built one called Animoca Brands, and again, you don't have to use ours, but this one activates over email. And we decided to do it over email because it was an interface that was easier for you to understand for most people because they're still using email in their work. And by activating it over email, I don't go to a website. We wanted to take them away from the ChatGPT search experience because that experience itself limits you, right? So if you go into a website and you're experiencing like search, you immediately start thinking, what should I ask it?
Yeah.
When that's not the way that you're supposed to frame it, right? And then maybe there's prompts and so on, and over time, they start reacting to it. And then you start to imagine, you can do this? I didn't know this, right? And so many people are surprised, it can actually respond in this manner and do that. And then when you begin from that level, the imagination opens up. It's not about, do I choose cursor, or do I want an abstraction of that, like Lovable, or like whatever, like these toolings, right? There's great, amazing, 11 Labs with voice, right? Or, with Gemini, the amazing thing that they're doing on like all sorts of things you can do from a tooling standpoint. Those are tools.
Kiro's a good one too.
Yeah, Kiro's great. Right?
I'm a little biased.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, of course. But what I'm saying is that requires a certain level of knowledge already, right? So it's like if you know what kind of car you want to build, because you've basically studied different cars and you've gone into the rabbit hole, then you'll find the parts. Do I need plexiglass? Do I need this? Which engine do I want to use? Like those things come when you know what you want, but you got to start somewhere. Like, I don't know any car builder that doesn't drive.
Yeah.
Right? Right? And you have to have that passion around it. The nice thing about AI, it's so ubiquitous. Was it maybe 5 years ago or 6 years ago that, if you asked our children what was the top job you wanted, it was like YouTuber or something, or, some social media influencer.
A great job, by the way.
Right? Yeah. Yes, of course. Right? Why was that? Right? Because it was something that they engaged in, they were passionate, they could see it. And similarly, there's no rule book about it, right? But then you start saying, oh, okay, so which platform, what are they doing? You dive deeper into this area, and then suddenly you find your areas of expertise that you can emerge from that and sort of optimize, right? It's the same thing, right?
Yeah, it's making a great point about diving in deep. And I mean, there's no greater time to do it than now, obviously. But as you dive deep, you learn the limits of these tools, and you eventually learn how to use these tools, but also you learn how not to use these tools, right? And so, regardless of the tool that you use, I truly am tool agnostic as long as you are using a tool, right? And so, I'm building all the time, I'm failing all the time, and I'm learning how to use them, how not to use them. I'm deploying, products that are over-engineered, right, that are not cost-optimized, and then what I'll do is I'll create another project, I'll reference that product, and I'll say, okay, iterate on that, these are the lessons that are on that. And so that's not something that was taught, that was something that I learned as I dove in deep, right? And so the more that the difference between somebody that succeeds as a founder or a group of founders or somebody that doesn't are the ones that are committed to that learning experience and diving in deep, learning and iterating potentially on multiple tools simultaneously. And then once you dive in deep and you understand, how to use these tools, how not to use these tools, what their limits are, what these limits are, at the same time, concurrently, these tools are getting better and better. Yeah. And that's when you start to figure out, this is the path. And that's when you also start to figure out, how does this align with what I'm passionate about? How does this also align with what my resources are, what my network is like? And then that's when sort of, hopefully, if you follow that process, that's when the light bulb moment happens, and then you're off to the races.
Yeah. The light bulb moment comes when you're solving a problem.
Yeah.
Right? For even when you talk about, I'm hitting the limits of this, well, how do I work around it? That's problem solving.
Yeah.
Right? Is it another tool? Is it a barrier? Is there a workaround? How do I do it? And this is also an element of grit. I might not know how to do this now, but I'll figure out how to overcome this particular mountain so that I get there, right? And frankly, if you want to go slightly philosophical, that's how we will have an edge over AI.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, because, this learning mindset and this ability to problem solve on the fly and being able to sort of deal with uncertainty is not something that an AI can do because it's not trained for that. It's trained on existing models. And it will give you good choices, but the ultimate decision framing is yours. And if you delegate everything to AI, there was this MIT study that said people use ChatGPT to get dumber, right?
Really?
Typical headline. It was a certain number of people, not all, right? I guess they just looked at, and I can see how that happens. If you're basically just giving the essay, if you don't know how to sort of write, and you give the essay to ChatGPT to write an essay for you, you don't know how to write.
Yeah.
Right? You don't know the principles of it. It just wrote it for you.
Yeah.
And it may be good or it may be bad. But the point is that you've gained nothing from it, right? You've not iterated yourself, right? And so the ability for you to then navigate that and know how to make it better goes away. So this idea of schooling through the hard work, whether it's math or even sort of, the scientific approach, these are just methods for you to basically iterate yourself to get to a decision framing around where you can solve these problems. And humans are irrational to a machine. We make decisions that are completely irrational. Every major startup that's built, or small startup, is an irrational decision. Right? I mean, you're not building something that is certain. You're building something that's highly uncertain. You're putting money on the line. You're wasting your time potentially, right?
If you're being logical, you would have never done it.
Yes. If you're a machine, don't do it, right? Yeah. Because the probability of failure is incredibly high, and yet we do that because we're risk engines. I would argue every attempt at a relationship, we're taking a risk, even though internally we're able to calculate that. A machine would probabilistically say, no, don't do that, right?
That's where reasoning and critical thinking come in.
Exactly.
Right? And so you need to realize when to use it and when not to use it. It still is based on, at least today, prompt and output. There isn't an evaluation and a learning feedback loop yet. And that's the differentiation, I think, from where we're at today versus
I think we both lived in a time when the calculator was not allowed in the classroom.
That's right.
Right? And the criticism was, it will make you dumb.
Yeah.
You will not know how to do math.
That's right.
The calculator has made math not just more abundant, but the faster breakthroughs in math.
Yep.
Because now more people can do math because of the calculator and then the computer. Right? I think AI will do the same.
I 100% agree. Yeah. I mean, it's like transportation. I mean, should you still keep walking around or take a train? I mean,
you could use a horse.
You could use a horse.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
the last question before we wrap up is, if I want to build something, do I increase my chance to be backed by Animoca if I use AWS?
What a set of questions. Well, okay, so first of all, I'm afraid to say the answer is no.
Yeah. I know the answer to that already.
You know,
Of course.
we wouldn't want to know whether you're using AWS. We would want to know how you're using AWS. Right? So if you come to us and say, I'm using AWS with this optimized whatever, I know the price structure, I can optimize it and blah, 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 that says something about you.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
That's more important than the particular tool
Oh, yeah,
you're
of course,
using.
of course.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, from a different lens to Yat's exact point, we see a lot of founders, regardless of cloud provider, making poor scaling decisions, right? And so the last thing, regardless of the cloud provider that you choose as a founder, to be going through when you're scaling is a migration. And so we spend a lot of time, leveraging and working with tools that are using off-the-shelf systems that work quite well, but they lack the infrastructure to provide scale and security. So again, the last thing you want to be going through is a migration when you're scaling. And so you need to start thinking about, regardless of the cloud provider, what tools that you're using that are going to allow you to scale securely and safely. Hey, just one quick thing in closing, if we have time. So AWS and Animoca are partnering on an agentic World Cup of football.
Oh, that. Okay,
Yeah,
we
so
were talking
little
about that.
sneak peek, stealth mode, but basically developers of all sizes are going to be able to go through a workshop to learn about how to develop agents. And then one of the outcomes of that is a game interface that Animoca has designed, so the agents will be competing in a soccer tournament in real time. And we're going to be running that at scale globally to correspond with FIFA this year. So be on the lookout for that.
And some people might do some polymarket bets on the side, I think, I'm sure.
I would not be surprised.
Indeed,
Yeah, we got to
yes.
figure out a way to tokenize this.
Yes,
somehow.
exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
See, I love this conversation because I've learned so much from you guys. It's always great talking to you, and my God, I've learned so much from you, Ian.
Oh,
thank
thank
you
you.
guys
Pleasure to be
for,
here.
Thank you for having us.
being on the show, and please come back soon. I would love to have you back. There's so much more we can talk about.